So, my name is Holly Charles, and we've talked already about that. We've already gone through this long bio about who I am. But there are some other things that make up who I am, and so I started to think about that. Who am I? I'm an educator. I'm a Christian. I am a woman, very obviously. I'm the author of the novel Velvet, which we'll talk a little bit about today. I'm a playwright. I'm an American. I'm African American. But I am my mother's daughter. And out of everything that we just talked about, all the different hats that I might put on, that in some ways is the most complex thing. And not just for me, but for everyone. Being your mother's daughter, being your mother's son, being your father's son, being your grandparents' grandchild. So in the spring of 2013, I realized just how complex that was. But because before that, I never really thought about how much what you were taught as a child actually shapes you as an adult. I was at Prairie View A&M. I was getting my master's degree. I decided I didn't want to take another test. And so I said, I'm going to go into independent study, and I'm going to write about something that matters. And what was most important to me was my relationship with my mother. I have an amazing relationship with her, and my relationship with my grandmother. And so I was able to talk to my grandmother, Nellie, this beautiful woman here. And I started asking her about my female lineage. And she immediately went into this story about my great-grandmother, Ludy. And this picture is really a metaphor for everything that I learned about her. It was blurry, it was unclear. There was so much that was left unsaid. And so I really started to delve into not just her own experience as a woman, but her experience as a Black woman. Her experience with Black motherhood. And arguably, Black motherhood is the most complicated genre of relationship there is. And that has everything to do with what the world teaches you about being a woman and what you're supposed to then pass down to your own daughter. Because of patriarchy, because of racial hierarchies, because of socioeconomics, all of these things further complicate the human condition for Black women. And so as I was learning about Ludy, and I'm learning about these aunts and uncles and all of these different things in my family, all the way from 1918 up to present, I started to ask myself specifically about Miss Ludy, that blurry picture. In the 1920s, what does a poor young Black girl from rural Texas, what is it that she knows about herself? One thing is that she knew she had no power. Another thing is that she had no value. The heaviest things for her to learn was that she was too Black to be pretty. And even heavier than that, that she was to blame for being a mother at 12 years old. And despite the fact that she had been taken advantage of by an older man, she was to blame for her condition. So very quickly, my great-grandmother Ludy, this woman who I never met before, but then started to become more and more sympathetic to, I realized that she had to come up with this mantra for herself in order to survive. And so she started thinking, people will see the worst of the absolute best picture that you paint. And so what she did, in very broad strokes, was she painted a different picture. Because she knew no matter what, she had no value, she had no power, she was to blame, she would never be considered beautiful. So what she did was she began to lie. She lied about the child that she bore. She lied about where she was from. She lied about anything that would cause people to dismiss her any more than they already did. But the most tragic of all of this is that she began to lie to herself. She took that lie and it became a truth that her dark velvet skin was not beautiful. So more questions came to me. In becoming a mother, in deciding to deny motherhood herself, how could she value herself when the world absolutely did not? And when we think deeper about that, what does she then teach her daughter about valuing herself? Was my great-grandmother a liar? Really tough question to ask myself as I was learning about her. Or, if I were to read a little bit more between the lines, Was she simply passing down her best version of the truth? So then comes the word truth. We all know what it is. We use it all of the time. It's not the biggest word. It doesn't seem complicated, but I had to ask myself, what is my own truth? So then I had to go back to the beginning. And I thought about my relationship with my mother, this amazing woman here. Look at me trying to look just like her. And I have such a beautiful relationship with her, but I still had to ask myself what truths were passed down to myself. And so, as you can see, I stood next to her. I wanted to be exactly like her. As she would walk around the house singing Gladys Knight or singing Anita Baker, I wanted to sound exactly like her. So what do I do with that? If I'm walking around and she is the leading authority on womanhood, on femininity, on motherhood, well, I thought, well, I'll just be exactly like her. But she had a different version of the truth. And it wasn't until I got into my 30s that I realized that some of the things that she taught me didn't exactly seem in alignment with my spirit. They weren't right, they weren't wrong, but they weren't me. And so I had to start asking myself, is the truth absolute? Is there just one truth? So when you look at the definition of truth, it says, that which is true or in accordance with fact or reality. So as the definition suggests, is truth based off of one's reality? Because if it is, that would complicate everything that she had ever taught me. And so I reflected on a time where I considered marriage. I reflected on this time where I went to the leading authority again on womanhood. And I told her I would get married, but I was a little confused about whether or not this was the right thing to do. And so I wrote about this, and I'd like to share this from a chapter in the book called My Mother's Wedding Dress. And this is the conversation my mother had with me. All I'm saying is that a man's going to cheat. Her eyes bugged out, daring me to say otherwise. But a man that loves you, though, will be discreet. So I killed the silence that was killing me. I put on my brave face, the one I'd seen my mother put on before she told me that lie about good men and discretion. I opened my mouth and spoke my contract. I would marry quickly. I would learn to forget. The rumors would die down, as would my expectations for fidelity if I was lucky. He could not afford it, neither could I. We would convince everyone that small and intimate was a testament to our love and not our finances. A few favors and friends before and for the wedding were all we needed to pull this thing off. Would she help? She would. In 3 months, no need to wait. And what about a dress? Well, where was hers? So I stepped out of my jeans and t-shirt as my mother helped me step into her wedding dress, and I balanced myself precariously on her shoulders as she struggled to pull her dress over my body. And it itched. And I stared into the mirror. And there I was. And there it was. Me and my mother's wedding dress. Me in my mother's wedding dress. And the dress seemed to float above my body, or my body seemed to disappear within the dress. Either way, it did not fit. And I felt my throat tightening and the pain behind my eyes from the sudden rush of tears. It wasn't the flood of emotion that you see in the movies when the bride-to-be says, "This is it." We did not squeal. We did not hug. Instead, she began to pull the garment taut around my waist, jerking my body in the process, and I mumbled the number of inches that I would need to take the dress in on each side while I slid out of those hideous sleeves and rolled down the neckline. "There," I said dryly. "Yeah, that looks good." My mother brightened a bit, making the room less somber. It was better. It wasn't my dream dress. It wasn't the dress I wanted, but it was the dress I had. And we stood motionless before the mirror for several minutes, a reflection of 2 generations and one dress. And so as I reflected on this story, on this time in my life where my mother was passing down her truth to me, I started to realize that every single woman has her own reality, and in turn has her own truth. So I had to respect the truth of Louie, and I had to respect this woman, Nanny Mae, who I'd never even met but feel connected to after doing my research on her. I had to respect Nellie, my grandmother. I had to respect the story of my mother. But most importantly, I had to respect my own reality and my own truth. There was this time where I was getting to the end of my thesis, right? I was almost finished, I'm almost there. I can smell the degree. And I get to the end, and I have to then write about my mother's story, right? And so I'm clacking away. And something's happening to me, I'm transforming, and I'm not really sure why, but I'm still clacking away. And my fingers never move, but I realize that there is something happening. Suddenly, I cannot see. And I realized that I was crying. I was crying because while I thought that what my mother taught me was not the truth, I realized that she gave me the absolute truth. I cried because instead of just knowing her story, I finally had acknowledged it. I realized that I had been irresponsible, not her. You see, I was treating my mother as though she was born in 1981 with me, never really considering the whirlwind of disappointments or any children that were lost or any marriages that failed. And so I never actually thought about how that might affect her reality and then her truth. And then came my thesis, and I thought I knew what I was writing about before I got started. But I learned very quickly that no, what I was supposed to learn was compassion as well, because a mother can only mother based off of her fears and experiences. A father can only father based off of his fears and experiences. Your teachers can only teach based off of their fears and experiences, because what else are you born into this world to receive? And so that everything that she had taught me was the most valuable thing that she could actually give me. She gave me her truth. There was never a lie that she had given me. So I started thinking further about the difference between knowing and acknowledging. And I thought about my friends, and I thought about so many people who have broken relationships, or relationships that are wonderful, but there's so much that is unsaid. So I ask you, when you think about your mother or your father or your mentor or some grandperson or any person that you love, have you actually thought about it? Do you know their stories? Now think deeper and ask, have you acknowledged their stories? Because there is a huge difference. I have been in education for 15 years, so I have this very, very unique experience of knowing the difference between the child who reads the book and who reads Cliff Notes or Schmoop or some chapter summary, or just Googled it, or just went straight to Wikipedia because we know that is the leading authority in all things. I could always tell the difference. And if I gave a multiple choice test, maybe everyone would pass. But when I asked them to connect to the story, I could always tell the difference between someone who knew the characters and who knew the characters. And so I'm asking you today, when you think about that person, because I know everyone here is holding someone right at the corner of their minds, are you reading the blurb on the back of the book? Or have you actually read cover to cover? How much do you know about the people you love, and how much do you acknowledge about the people that you love? Knowing and acknowledging. I would argue that unconditional love starts with acknowledgement. I want to ask you guys to do something. I want you to imagine that on your way here, it was raining. It was a difficult journey. You finally get here. And there's water everywhere. You're coming through. Your shoes they don't have very much grip on them. You're getting ready to walk in through the door. You take a fall. You're embarrassed. You've broken a leg. There's so many things that happen. You miss work. All these inconveniences, all because you tried to get here today. You were on your journey and you failed. Now ask yourself, what do you do when you see your child approaching that same door? I think if we were honest with ourselves, we would say, slow down. Don't walk through that door. As a matter of fact, sneak in through windows from here on out. Don't go to Brockman at all. Look, Rice University is a hazard. You'd have all of these things to say. But if you really thought about it, you'd have to ask yourself some questions. Is it raining? Is my child in a rush? Does my child have better grip on his or her shoes? Or is my child even afraid to fall? There's a certain level of human compassion that we all have to give to each other. As daughters, as mothers, as grandparents, as teachers, as friends. And we also have to acknowledge each other's stories enough to know that maybe your parent is not telling you you're not good enough or you're not deserving. Maybe what they're doing is trying desperately to keep you from falling. Despite all of these things that we talked about today, the difficulties of being a black woman on this soil, the difficulty of growing up in certain neighborhoods, the difficulty of having a fall, metaphorically or literally. Despite patriarchy, despite racial hierarchies, sexism, socioeconomics, despite fears, whether they're yours or someone else's, despite experiences, spiritual heirlooms, generational curses, despite all of these things, and despite how absolutely beautiful my mother looks in her wedding dress. One day, we will stand in the mirror together. 2 generations, 2 different dresses, and one amazing amount of love and respect for each other's experiences. Thank you.